NST.net. We've had a lot of segments around here. This one is going to be a beaut. Many of you have seen me parade around for many, many years in a Baltimore Skipjacks jersey. This is one of the real jerseys. It kind of hangs long, and it's got a 14 on it, and a 1 and a 4. And on the back of the jersey is the name Seftel, and it's been pronounced Seftel, and all sorts of ways. I've been screamed at in various hockey rinks from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, from New York to Washington in this throwback Baltimore Skipjacks late 1980s Steve Seftel jersey. And finally, for the first time ever on my radio program, after now waiting 30 years, Steve Seftel joins us from Canada. Oh, Canada, what's going on, brother? How are you, man?
I'm very good, Nestor. I'm pleased to be able to speak with you again. This is a nice opportunity. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're writing a book, right? So let's get to the beginning of all of this, because people ask me how I wound up with the jersey. Give me your story as to how you wound up in the Baltimore Skipjacks jersey, and this jersey wound up on my back, because people ask me all the time, who's Steve Seftel? And they can look you up and see that you got a cup of coffee in the NHL and played a little bit and were a well-thought-of forward who was a capital draft pick and all that from Kitchener, Ontario. You're in the international hockey database, internet hockey database, and all that stuff as well. But, people always ask me, who was Steve Seftel? And I said, he was the first dude on the team I ever met, my first time on the beat. When the Capitals came in, I was sent down to practice, and he was the first guy I talked to coming off the ice. And when his jersey was made available to me, I picked his. So that's the story of how your jersey got on my back, Steve.
Well, I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, as you mentioned. I played 3 years in the Ontario Hockey League for the Kingston Canadians. I was drafted by the Capitals in 1986 in the second round. 40th overall.
That's an exciting day, right? I mean,
it was. The draft was at the Montreal Forum that year.
You were a first-round hopeful, right?
Was Joe Murphy by the Detroit Red Wings.
You were a first-round hopeful, though, right? You hoped to be in the first round.
Yeah, well, I had an unfortunate incident in the beginning of my rookie season in Kingston. I broken my ankle, which set me back. I missed the first 3 months of the season, so I really had some work to do when I came back into the lineup. Fortunately, I did get back in the lineup, got some games in. We played, went a couple rounds in the playoffs, and people were able to get a look at me and able to get a book on what I could do. And I have to say, I talk in my book about Jack Button, former Caps director of player personnel and recruitment.
Love Jack Button. Everybody knew Jack Button, loved Jack Button, right?
Yeah, and Jack was instrumental in drafting me, and I think fondly of Jack, a really nice man and a really intelligent hockey man.
All right, so your book is Shattered Ice, and I'm going to read right from your LinkedIn here. Shattered Ice is Steve Seftel's first book about his hockey journey, woven in with the players, coaches, friends, places, struggles. I'm probably one of the friends here. Stories about Wayne Gretzky and about Don Cherry, and I met you right around the same time. You and I are the same age, by the way, right? So I was born October 14 of 1968. When is your birthday, Steve?
May 14th.
So we were you're 5 months older than me.
Yeah.
So when you got to Baltimore, I want to say that was 88. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, 88, 89 season, that's correct.
You were 19, maybe 20. I was 19, maybe 20. We were sort of the same age. The Tyler Larders were around. There were some older Kent Painter-type guys around as well. Trotzy was running around as a junior scout or Western scout, wherever he was at that point. Terry Murray, Brian Murray were really in charge, along with David Poyle, of the organization with Jack Button. And Doug McLean was also involved there after coming over from the Detroit Red Wings organization. He went on to do some great things as well. I want to bring this whole thing up to speed because I found you on LinkedIn, I don't know, man, sometime maybe a decade ago, right? And we sort of connected a little bit, and your kids and this and that. And I've been in and out of Toronto for hockey games over the course of time, but you haven't come on the air with me. We haven't really told any stories about this. And at some point, you decided to write a book, and I guess in the last year and a half, and were you the one that told me Doug McLean was plugging me on Canadian television or something during the playoffs?
That is correct. So we have a program up here called Hockey Central. It's on during the hockey season, it's on at noon hour, and many hockey fans watch it. And Doug McLean's one of the regular contributors on the panel, along with Brian Burke and Gord Stellick, Nick Kiprios, who's another former Capital.
Absolutely.
And so one day I was watching, I often watch it, and Doug was talking about Nestor from Baltimore, giving him a hard time. And so I reached out to you, because I know you were often in the dressing room after games with Jim Jackson, who we talked about. And you and Jimmy would be in the room, and Doug was telling a story about you in the dressing room. So I heard that, and I was thinking to myself, the majority of the listeners probably weren't sure who Nestor was from the Baltimore Sun. So, but of course I did know. So I reached out to you and let you know that. And what was interesting is through me letting you know, you had Doug on as a guest.
Well, so this story and this is where I'll pick it up, because it was 2 years ago. I was in Toronto, and it was the week where the Leafs had won one of the first two games in D.C. and then had won Game 3. And Trotz at that point had benched, I believe, the goalie, right? It changed goalies at that point. And Toronto was on fire, Steve. Like, it was their first playoffs. They had just drafted a kid from the desert. You know, the games were sold out. There were 20,000 people out in the square watching the games. I mean, it was a scene. And I was staying up the road in a little bit of a questionable neighborhood that had some really phenomenal dim sum, as I remember it, up the river a little bit there outside of Toronto. I'll get the name of the town because it's a good hockey name. Hold on a second here. Was it Peterborough? Does that sound right, or am I nuts in saying that? That's not right. Scarborough. I was in Scarborough, okay?
Okay, yeah, Scarborough is part of Toronto, yeah.
Sorry,
Peterborough's a little further away.
I was in Scarborough out on the 401 getting up toward Pickering, okay? This was not Oshawa, but before on the road to Oshawa. So I'm staying out at this place with a bunch of kids in the hotel and whatnot, and I got a text from you. I'll never forget it. And you're like, Doug McLean was talking about you on Canadian television today. And now I'm in Canada, right? And I'm like, why is Doug McLean talking about me? Did he see me somehow? Or, like, did somebody reference me? Because I haven't talked to Doug in 20 years. I've been looking for Doug. I was looking to get Doug on the show. And the next thing I know, you find me. I find Doug. Doug comes on. Doug, as usual, poops all over me on the air. And I've had him on like 10 times since. It's if I want to feel bad about myself, I just call Doug McLean. You know, he'll call me at any point, and he'll abuse me. But I love Dougie, and I love that era of my life. You know, being 20 years old, it prepared me for so many things in my life, Steve. Having guys like you and writing stories and Jack Button and these incredible sort of father figure coaches in that world that then led me into the baseball world and the football world and all the things that I've done since I was 20 years old. But you've decided to write this book, and I want to give you some oxygen here and let you tell your story because I don't know you like 30 years later, right? Like we don't know each other at all, and you began to tell me a little bit about how our relationship and Dougie pooping on me got you in touch with Dougie, and now you're doing this book. So go ahead, tell your story, Steve. I want to hear it, man.
Well, going back to I mentioned I played junior hockey in Kingston. Going back to those days, you know, I wasn't feeling well. I had went to the doctor, and I mentioned to the doctor that I was having some issues, and he said to me, I can't find anything wrong with you. So I kind of left it at that. I wasn't really sure. It was just some physical problems. And then, you know, I had a couple injuries along the way. I turned professional. And, I guess it was in 1992, I had my second ACL tear. And going into the training camp the following season, I was struggling, and I was, again, having some difficulties off the ice, you know, mentally. And reached out to to people around me, but I just didn't know how to ask for help. And even though I was reaching out, I wasn't asking the right questions. So, you know, people often ask me, why'd you leave? Why? Because when I left the Capitals organization, when I left Baltimore, I was still under contract, and I was kind of spiraling out of control, but I just chose it in December of 92 to go home and pack it in, and I never really knew why. People would say, why did you stop playing? And I didn't have a good answer.
You were 24 years old, right?
24 years old,
24 years old. You were a second-round draft pick. You had sort of beating it around in the minors for 3 years, right? Like literally, and the way it would be accessed here would be say he went back to the farm. That's kind of how in Baltimore the 2,800 people that would show up when you're playing the Binghamton Whalers or playing for the Binghamton Whalers, which you did for a couple of minutes as well when we had sort of a code share around here. But you were like a skipjack through and through. I mean, you played 58 games in 88, 74 in 89, 66. I remember when you got called up. I remember covering the first game you got called up. I think you played pretty well in one game, maybe up in Philadelphia. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, that was. I played. First game was in Detroit. My second game was at the Spectrum against the Flyers. That's
I covered
right.
that game. I was at that game because you were there, and it was kind of a big deal that the kid, after 3 years, got called up, and you played literally 4 games in the National Hockey League, and were almost never heard from ever again, including by me, who liked you a lot, right?
Yeah. Well, just to give you a little bit, go a few years further. So I went back to school. I had I was still having some mental issues, and I wasn't feeling well. Enter the workforce. I'm now working. I'm moving up through the kind of graduating through the ranks. I made it into a management position, and I was still having these mental breakdowns and issues where I was just spiraling. But at that time, people weren't talking about mental health and the associated things that go with it. And I started writing this book because my body, I just completely crashed about a year and a half ago. There were some days when I couldn't get out of bed, and
wow.
There were other days that were really difficult. I didn't know if I was going to see tomorrow. And I started writing the book, and what the book did is it made me go back and look at my whole career and start to see the pattern that had formed way back to when I was a teenager. And I had a real pattern of a destructive kind of pattern, and then at that time, though, people started talking about mental health, and it's only in the last couple of years that it started to be a little more mainstream and out in the open. And I can tell you, when I was struggling, out of the hockey world, DeMar DeRozan from the Raptors came out. Kevin Love was playing for the Cavaliers at the time. He came out, and these other athletes were talking about mental health, and I started to think, maybe this is what's happening. And I went to some psychotherapy, and I started to realize that I was dealing with some mental health issues that needed to be corrected. And the book was really a form of therapy, although I wrote it the hockey was the most joy I ever had in my life. But the book took me to the dark places, made me understand why I did what I did and the cycle I was repeating over and over in my life.
Well, this is an unbelievable, it's going to be a great read. Shattered Ice is the name of the book. Steve Seftel and I met each other. We were 20 years old at a hockey rink. I believe we met down in Columbia. You guys used to skate down in Columbia at the ice rink down there. And I covered a practice, and I was just trying to get to know every Steve Malti and every Tyler Larder and Robin Bawa and all these guys that were your teammates. You said you really moved back from everyone in your life from hockey, including myself. Is anyone from the hockey life other than me wearing your jersey from time to time? And I didn't realize that me wearing your jersey could have been painful to you, over the course of time. It was always such a joyous thing for me to wear your jersey.
No, I have to admit, I saw you were at a playoff game, I believe maybe a year ago.
With Tomlin.
It was in Pittsburgh.
Oh, I was with Tomlin.
Behind you, there was someone in Pittsburgh wearing a Crosby jersey, and I saw that on Twitter, and I thought that was pretty cool. But as far as the guys I played with, part of the stuff I was dealing with, when I left hockey, I left hockey behind me. I pushed everybody away, and looking back, that was a mistake. But it was part of what I was dealing with mentally and some of the struggles. And I felt like I couldn't face those people. It's challenging to admit, but that's where I was. But what I'm trying to do now is reconnect, and writing the book has kind of given me the strength to do that. And even, there was a period not too long ago where I saw Doug. I was watching Doug on TV up here, just covering a hockey game, and I tell people that he was my favorite coach, and some coaches just have a way of connecting with players, and me and him had a great relationship, and I really connected with him with that coach-player relationship, And I knew you had him on as a guest because we had some interaction, and I reached out to you, and that was a big step for me to actually ask for help because...
Well, you know what? Dougie's a psychologist, right? I mean, at heart, coach and all that stuff. Dougie's PhD-ish sort of with psychology and I mean, that's his gig, and that's probably one of the reasons he connected with you even when you were a young guy, right? He always had sort of that wisdom, and he had tough love with me because I sort of enjoyed it. It was our relationship, you know what I mean?
Well, he was never at a loss for words. Like he had a great laugh. I say in my book, I suffered from a lot of stress and anxiety. And when Doug would laugh, I kind of washed that all away. So I say in the book, I always hoped people would tell him a joke because I just wanted to hear him laugh because it would wash away a lot of the stress I was feeling. And but like I said, I reached out to you. You got me in touch with him, and I have to thank you because from that discussion on the phone, I went to see him in Toronto, and we had lunch together, and we spent 2 hours together. And I mean, it went by like a snap. We could have spent 6 hours together. We were just talking hockey in the old days, and it was a great meeting, and I know he enjoyed it too. And it was a step it all came from me asking you for his number. So,
That's
and then
awesome.
I asked him to write the foreword for the book because I told him I'd be honored because I have so much respect for him as a hockey man, and I thought it'd be a great honor if he'd write the foreword, and he agreed. So,
I'm looking forward to reading this, man. When's the book coming out? When can we get a look at it? I saw Dougie threw a tweet out to you. I'll throw a tweet out to the universe as well. You got people tweeting you when you had like a mullet back in '87, right?
Yeah. I talk about the mullet years in the book, and as a matter of fact, I talk about a special relationship I had with the woman that cut my hair. Her name was Helen Groom. She was from North Baltimore. And we had a terrific relationship, and Tim, her boyfriend Tim, they were huge. I turned them into huge Skipjacks fans, and she took care of me in the mullet years. So, those were good times, and I certainly loved being in Baltimore. I loved everything about the city, and it was a great place to live for those. So I was out there about 5 years.
Where are you, back in Kitchener, your hometown, or no?
Waterloo, Ontario. It's kind of like Twin Cities up here, Kitchener-Waterloo, and back to my roots.
I got to figure out where Kitchener and Waterloo are now. Like, hold on here. I'm Googling it so I can find you when I...
We're about an hour west of Toronto. So, as I was saying to you earlier, we have room on the Raptors bandwagon if you want to join us.
Well, there's a week or two left for that. I mean, maybe at least 3-4 games before it's all over with here. But Kitchener-Waterloo, so you're not far, man. Like, when I get to Hamilton, I just hang a left turn instead of a right and go back up the riverside, right? So
we're... You're going to go west from Hamilton instead of east to Toronto. Yeah.
All right, look, man, our time will come. There will be beverages. There will be food. There will be celebration. I'll even let you wear your jersey if you're nice to me, all right?
That'd be terrific.
Steve Seftel joining us here. His book is coming out. It's Shattered Ice, One-Time Skipjack. I'm wearing my number 14, Steve Seftel, 1988. And I didn't even tell the story about how this got issued, but it happened one time when I was syndicated at the Old Port in Maine, where the Maine then Pirates equipment manager had all the old Skipjacks jerseys, offered me any one I wanted, and I said, I want the red roadie Steve Seftel because he was my first friend with the Skipjacks. So there it is. It has been worn. The Stanley Cup has been raised with this. It has pestered Mike Tomlin during Stanley Cup playoff wins in Pittsburgh, and it probably will pester Ted Leonsis as he gets more pissed at me by the day up here in Baltimore because he won the Stanley Cup and didn't bring it to Baltimore and lied to Baltimore hockey fans. It's true. Nasty at WNST.net is the way to find me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere the puck flies, you can find me, even 30 years later. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.